The biggest decision I had to make here was finding the perfect location for the deck. The size of this backyard is about 80 feet by 35 feet, and the deck is around 16 feet by 12. The plan here is to put this in the center of the yard, and I'll have to remove the fire pit which is in that location and also the bench. Now there are a couple of ways you can go with prepping the area. One, you can clean out the grass that's here, or you can just kill it using some sort of weed killer. But I'll take a different approach here. I'm gonna leave the grass as is, then I'll place the weed barrier on top of the grass, and that should kill and prevent the grass from growing. When things can go my way, I like super clean and modern design, which is why I wanted this deck to have no joints at the top. And of course, that comes at a cost. The materials has to be longer, and of course that introduced a lot more weight. And a good thing I had a friend of mine to lend me a hand. There's a lot of prep work that goes into these projects, so let's get started by cutting these boards down to size. To speed up the workflow here, I set up a quick and simple miter saw station that would allow me to make repeatable cuts, which should make this process a little more efficient. To give me a better visual, we started by laying out the frame of the deck. To assemble the deck, I used 3-inch deck screws, but you can also use joist hangers, which is probably a better option, but in this case, once everything is all assembled and locked together, this thing is going to be solid. The final product of the deck will have a bit of an angle to it, but within that angle, there will be a rectangle, so I'm going to use one of the joists to properly space this end of the rectangle. And now I'll add in a few of the joists. At this point, the frame of the deck is complete. Now I will use Trex decking on top of this structure, and since Trex is a composite material, there's a minimum requirement of 16 inches on center. Once the deck is lifted, I'll come back and add the remaining joist boards, this way I can meet the minimum requirement. And as I did with the frame, I added 3 screws per joist on each side. This is the first time I built the deck or any structure of this size, so my approach may or may not be different from anyone else. I just felt this way may have been easier by just building the structure and then attaching them to the post. And since the plan is to lift this, I don't want to add too many of the joists, which will make this a bit heavy to lift. So this part is quite important. I put the deck in the location that I wanted, then I took some marking spray, then spray where I wanted each post to be. We then moved the deck from that location and dug out the hole for each post. I'm located in Florida, which is a warm climate, so we don't experience frost issues. However, if you live in a cold climate, that is a thing you'll have to face. Another thing to think about is if you have a sprinkler system, you may want to run it just to make sure you don't have one in the deck location. My average post was around 15 to 24 inches deep. In the occasion you do, just reroute it or just cap it off. I also added some gravel in the hole for drainage. Now I felt it was easier to move the structure and then dig the hole. However, you can just leave the structure in place and dig the hole around the location that the post will go. After dragging the structure back in place, we then hoisted it up on some 4x4. Doing this would make the job a little easier if you're working alone. Now the yard do have a little bit of a slope which allow the water to run away from the house towards the property line. With that in mind, I referenced everything off the front side of the deck. Before adding any screws, I used clamps to hold the frame to the post. I started off at one corner and worked my way around the deck until I got the deck leveled. Now I spent a lot of time trying to make sure this was right, and even though I got it leveled with the level, I still felt unsure because the fence was leaning from the previous hurricane and also the ground had a pitch to it, so my eyes was playing tricks on me and I couldn't tell if the deck was leveled or not. Even though it was showing that it was straight on the level, I still had to pull out my laser, and that's when I decided that, okay, it's leveled. And although I didn't show it here, I constantly checked for squaring through this entire process. And the way I did so is by measuring diagonally across the deck in the rectangled section. If you measure in both directions and come up with the same number, this means the deck is square. If it's out of square, you may just have to push one corner in or pull it out. After I got the deck leveled and square with the 4 corner posts, I then went on to adding the posts on the inside. Now keep in mind all the corner posts are still being held with clamps and no screws at this point. My thinking here is since the deck is in its location, I'm going to try to add stability by working from the inside out. At this point, the deck is pretty stable, so I'll mix up some concrete and pour it in each post. By the time night came around, I pulled out the level again just to make sure everything was still on point. Everything was still intact and it looked like I'm ready to start adding the remaining joists. To speed up the joist hanging process and make things a little easier, I took a scrap piece of lumber and marked out the location where the joist will sit. You can also see that I'm using a scrap piece of 2x4 to also set the spacing, this way I don't have to measure everything. And although I had help for a good portion of this project, I'm so used to working alone, I made these quick 2x4 jigs that allow me to hold the joists in place while I screw them in. I repeated the same thing over and over again until all the joist was in its place. So this is Mario, who helped me out with a ton of the heavy lifting on this project. And to my knowledge, he's never built anything, so I gave him a simple task by building the step to the deck. Once the frame was built, we checked for squaring before adding the additional parts. I filled in the post with the dirt that was removed from the holes. I then compacted the dirt within the holes using a piece of lumber. Now I need to prep the area for the step. And to make sure I don't do more or less work than I actually need to do, I used a marking spray to mark out the area. And with the yard being at a slope, I need to remove the section of grass and some of the dirt here just so I can get the step to be level. Now everyone works a bit different. Much of this could have been done all at once, so when you pour the cement, it was just all done in one session. Whenever I can simplify the process, that's what I aim for. So trying to work on the entire deck at one time, I felt like it would be too much to think about, so I built this in pieces, which will allow me to focus on one thing at a time. The backside of the step will be attached to the deck, but the front of it will be supported by 2 posts. Getting the step to sit properly, it took a little while, but we needed to make sure that it had the ability to sit straight and level. I secured the back of the step to the deck and then attached the front to the 2 posts. Prior to adding the posts, I filled the holes with drainage rocks. Since I need to do some additional work to the deck throughout the day, I'll save the cement pour for the back end of the day, this way I don't disturb it after it's poured. Now I could have kept it simple and designed a big rectangle with a simple step on it. For me, I wanted something a bit cooler. To make this connection here, I use a 6-degree angle here. Then I use a piece of wood under it to hold it as I rest it and do all the prep work. As you see what I'm doing here, I'm using a clamp to basically force the wood to bend just so that it can cooperate. Because the angled face board is cut at an angle, all the smaller joist boards are also cut to that same exact angle, which allow them to fit in perfectly. Not only is the angled face attached to the joist, but it's also secured to the first step. And not only did I secure the joist from the front, but I also secured it from the inside. Now this part was a little bit tricky to pull off, but visually I don't think you'll be able to see the difference. But if you want to get even more accurate, you could use a string prior to securing this. That way you can make adjustment on the fly to the string. This wood is not straight to begin with, so once I wrap it with the deck board, you wouldn't even notice it. Now back at the far end, I wanted to add some additional support to make up for the suspended corner. The goal here is to have this so that it's not visible when you're standing out looking back at the deck. Now when you're working with lumber, it's forever changing. Not a whole lot you could do there. If you notice, I have a string wrapped around this section and you can see a slight gap in here. So what I'm going to do is take a set of clamps and force that out. Then I'll add some bridging in between, and this should help with the bowing that you see. And one sure way to take away the flexing from the individual joists is by adding the bridging all the way through the deck. To finish off the suspended end, I use a handsaw to cut that off, carrying the angle all the way out to the end. When I'm working on projects, there are times that I do get stumped on the way I should address something, so I continue to do something else, and during that time, I usually come up with something. For this situation, I just added a scrap piece of wood that extends that board all the way out to the end using some wood glue and screws. Now I need to cut this flush to match the side of the deck. For this application, I think a handsaw works really well. At this point, the structure of the deck is complete. All there is to do is to add cement in the post for the step. So right now we got the deck completely finished. The very next thing we want to do is put on the joist tape, and what that's going to do is protect it from not only rotting, but also it's going to help extend the life of the joist and the beam itself. Before I applied the deck tape, I made sure I sand down the top part of the structure. Then I cleaned off the sawdust so that nothing prevents the tape from sticking. Now I must say this has to be the stickiest tape I've ever worked with before, so I don't think anything's gonna prevent this from sticking to the wood. Applying the tape is as straightforward as can be, and just like that, the deck taping is done. In the past, I've tried a number of weed barriers, and many of those let me down by allowing weeds to come through. In this case, I'm going to use a commercial grade weed barrier, and I'm still not sure of the results that you're going to get from it, but I'm hoping that this one holds up. I pulled out enough weed barrier to go the full distance of the deck. This isn't quite necessary, but I did start it off by stapling the weed barrier to the deck. My first intention was to close off the bottom so no wasp can build a nest underneath or rodents can make it a home. I did go away from that idea because I didn't want to restrict airflow from passing under the deck. The weed barrier is held to the ground using landscape fabric pins. The pins were simple to install. After laying the fabric, it's a simple matter of just pressing the pin down through the fabric and into the ground. Stay tuned for part 2. I will be finalizing the deck, adding the deck boards, the fascia boards, and also lighting.